So the Outer Worlds Peril on Gorgon DLC is finally here. After 11 long months, we could finally get our hands on the first piece of new content coming to the Outer Worlds since its initial release. Out of code for this DLC provided a couple of weeks ago by Private Division, so do take that into account as you watch this review. I had early access and didn't have to pay for the DLC, so that could certainly bias my opinions in some way. But otherwise, in this video, I want to really answer the question as to whether or not this DLC is worth returning for. Although I'm not going to provide any major spoilers for the DLC, as it really is a questing based experience. It is kind of peculiar for a game to have a DLC, especially a game the size of the Outer Worlds on a smaller scale, to get a DLC 11 months later, but I think for some of you this DLC will definitely warrant a reinstall or a reinstall and a purchase of the DLC. And that definitely is relevant. This DLC costs $15, or if you have Xbox Game Pass you get 10% off, or alternatively you could actually buy a season pass where you can get both DLCs for $25, so save $5 on each of them. Peril on Gorgon is going to take you to a totally new location in the Outer Worlds, that with the new asteroid of Gorgon. You'll immediately discover a fairly abandoned mansion held up by this new character named Minnie, who hires you to find her deceased mother's journal. As you land on Gorgon, you're going to find a very destroyed area. It was a past research center owned by Spacer's Choice, and you'll find many of the past scientists, workers, or residents held up in a local bar. And really, this is where you'll find nearly all of the NPCs from Gorgon. What this DLC is a mystery or detective-based DLC. Right off the bat, everything is vague. Nobody's willing to fully divulge the information, whether it be Minnie or many of these workers you can talk to and actually get some side quests from. You just get little rumblings that something bad had happened here, and perhaps something bad was underway here. And overall, I would actually say the tone of this DLC is quite a bit different. You'll have this mystery aspect. You are really acting as a detective, but even further, there are definitely some spookier or scarier vibes, from the music to even some of the enemies you'll encounter. All throughout this, you have a lingering question. You're trying to find something out. Firstly, you're trying to find out what exactly was going on Gorgon, what were they researching, and then it kind of evolves into, well, what exactly happened? And once you get that question answered, you're going to have immediately a second one presented to you as a mystery figure does appear. And this mystery figure will kind of act as the antagonist through much of the story. As you explore the area, you will find a distraught and destroyed land, many dead scientists, marauders, and even just test subjects. You will uncover some pretty bad atrocities on this planet, and one of the really cool parts about this, one of the cool ways Obsidian here reinforces the mystery or really atrocity vibe, is your companions. And I think playing this DLC with companions is a significantly better experience than not, as oftentimes they will be vocal about what you find or see, whether it's just uneasiness about a scary situation or reflection on something horrid or horrifying you just uncovered. Your companions definitely play an active role in the base game, and that without a doubt is continued here. And although they do have similar opinions all throughout, there definitely is variations depending on which two companions you bring with you. One of the other ways this varies from the base game of the Outer Worlds is it really only focuses in on one specific corporation, that with Spacer's Choice. And I definitely saw some concern around this, but I think it's a good addition to the game. In the base game of the Outer Worlds, the corporations and really the board overall are kind of held to this higher level. You don't get a ton of insight into them, just little crumbs here or there. But conversely, with this DLC, you get a much deeper dive into Spacer's Choice, actually seeing some of their facilities, seeing the wealth they were spending on it, and even some creepy things along the way. And you get insight into the decision making and a bit more behind the scenes than I feel like you had in the base Outer Worlds experience. So it is a pretty cool additive aspect to get a deeper dive into one corporation, not having a bunch of competing ones. But you also see just how horrifying some of the actions of this corporation were. Which, speaking of, one of the interesting aspects of the Peril on Gorgon DLC is it almost at points had Fallout 76 vibes. And what I mean by that is, as you're exploring the main asteroid, which is without a doubt the largest piece of landmass and probably where you'll spend most of your time with this DLC, it is mostly desolate. You'll find marauders and you'll find enemy robots, but otherwise there's not many people for you to run into, just a few here or there. So much of this DLC has its lore or story explained to you through these newly added voice logs, which are a cool addition. There definitely is solid voice acting there. It does give you a bit more insight again into that corporation, but also through a lot of terminal entries. Oftentimes you'd go to a terminal and have emails that are archived, sent, and received, and you could spend a good 10-15 minutes reading through all of them, and at multiple occasions this would pop up. And it definitely felt like at points the reading became a bit overwhelming and I found myself just skipping skipping through because I was like, all right, I need to go do something else. Many of the people you are reading or hearing about are dead, or at least presumed dead as you're playing the story. But to be clear, it's not to say there aren't characters in this. There are still several main characters that you talk to, a lot of dialogue with humans, but this DLC definitely had a good bit of reading terminal entries and listening to some of those new voice logs. But then of course comes the interesting question with, okay, well, what is the scope and size of this? How long does it take to complete? And due to what I just talked about, that is kind of a hard question to answer. For me, compiling all of my footage together took me 6 hours to complete this DLC, and that includes the main quest as well as some of the side quest and little tasks, which I'll go a bit more into in a moment. But you could definitely stretch this out to 9 to 10 hours if you spend a lot more time exploring, reading. Although I did read many terminal entries, I definitely was skimming at points and skipped some throughout because, again, there was just a lot of them. There's some minor locations you could find on Gorgon that you can explore quite a bit more in depth than I did. There are definitely some buildings I didn't fully go into, and at points during the main quest, I would do the objective and just kind of leave, even though there's probably a good 20 minutes of additional content if you just look around and loot. So as far as the length on this one, if you're really rushing, you could probably complete this in 4 hours if you're almost going speedrun status and just doing essentials and not really anything extra. If you play more normally, probably 6 to 7 hours, and if you tend to play a bit slower, probably an 8 to 10 hour experience. As far as an overview of the content overall, you do have the main story, which again is uncovering the mystery of Gorgon, and then kind of gradually over time uncovering more and more of what happened here and the individuals involved, and ends with a nice big morally gray choice. And there are a couple of twists along the way, some stuff that happened that I definitely wasn't expecting. There are also 2 major side quests, although I wouldn't even really call these major. You're going to get tasks from some of the local residents, or one, it's not even human involved, you'll just find it, and it'll be more or less just going somewhere, getting something, or going to several locations across the asteroid and getting some things. But it does help with exploring the asteroid overall. And there are even some minor tasks that aren't even full side quests that you'll just stumble upon, but this literally took 5 to 10 minutes at max. As far as the new locations, this is something that may surprise people. Of course, the biggest and most in-depth location is the Gorgon asteroid. There's the main asteroid, but then also that mansion that's a separate fast travel location. There's actually a new location in Byzantium. This DLC does take you back into some of the other parts of the Outer Worlds. You go here during one of the main quests, and it honestly is a really memorable little canid show, and you could pet the canids, which is always fun. There's a new area on Groundbreaker for you to explore, but this one was a bit less memorable. There's also an invading spaceship that will try and take you over, and you'll have to fight your way or handle that in one way or another. And actually, you could go to Olympus, which is one of the planets in the base game of the Outer Worlds that now you could finally travel to. And overall, with some of these locations, they were very pretty or bright and memorable. Olympus in particular, you were actually outside, almost in space to a degree, and it was a really cool experience being on that planet, or really a station located in or around the gas planet. Gorgon itself also, you had some pretty cool visuals just looking up into the sky or looking down at Gorgon from the mansion. I definitely had a few moments during this DLC where I really paused and took it all in because there was quite a bit to take in and it looked very nice. As far as new weapons or content, it was kind of hard to tell what armor was new because so much of it looks the same. There are a wide variety of new unique weapons, so it would large in part be a familiar weapon with a bit of a different stat or a new name that had some better effects. There are 2 new science weapons you could find via this, which are pretty cool, but I don't want to spoil too much around them. One is given from a quest, one you find during the main quest, although there are some genuinely new weapons added in with this, but it definitely again wasn't the focus. Also, something interesting, it seems like they raised the level cap for the Outer Worlds overall. Now you could actually find many of your skills can be leveled to level 150 with a new Virtuoso rank. It previously stopped at Master. These giving additional bonuses, but also of course being 50 additional levels and kind of the points hard to get to. There's some new creatures and new types of creatures, a couple of new enemy types you will encounter that were interesting or cool, but large in part when it came to the new creatures or even the new enemies overall, these were very familiar. They were technically different, but really they played pretty much identical to how a lot of other marauders or creatures you encountered would. Although this is definitely a higher tier DLC, you will consistently find high level enemies and level 30 plus weapon drops. It's probably one of the most difficult areas to clear out throughout all of the Outer Worlds. But again, the main piece of new content are those story and quests. That's the bulk of it. And these are conveniently labeled, so you'll know it's a Peril on Gorgon quest, not just a generic Outer Worlds quest. So then the big question, is it worth returning for this after 11 months of potentially not playing? And it really depends on what you like the Outer Worlds for. If you just liked the base game of the Outer Worlds and you're looking for more of it, and you don't mind that $15 price tag, this is definitely worth a buy and a download. It's not really changing up a ton about the Outer Worlds outside of the theme and the fact that now now it's more detective focused, but rather it's more of the Outer Worlds. If you like that iconic humor, the occasional difficult choice, and some deep lore to get into, and actually learning about what atrocities occurred here, this is that. It'll be more Outer Worlds questing and story, which I know a lot of people do want. The level of choice you encounter during this DLC is very similar to the base game. You can make choices, but oftentimes it'll lead to similar outcomes or not have huge consequences. The final choice has a larger consequence, but really throughout there isn't a ton in the way of super impactful choices. It's again pretty similar to the base game. The areas you went to definitely felt more interesting this time in appearance, like you were in a cooler space station. Or again, that Kanan show was a pretty unique one and pretty memorable, but it's not like they had significantly more depth or way more exploration than any base game locations. This DLC or expansion, as Obsidian has mentioned a couple of times, isn't really overhauling any of the base game mechanics or systems. It adds on top of what already is there and actually is a nice little pit stop if you're playing the main story. But it's the same combat, it's large in part the same leveling, the companion integration is very similar to what the base game is. That's actually nice that they didn't forget that. They definitely could have cheaped out on that aspect, but they didn't. And the story overall is definitely an addition on top of what was already there, not necessarily trying to tie in too much into the base game story or be a continuation of it. It does provide some explanation as to one enemy type you'll see throughout the Outer Worlds and a bit more background on how exactly they appeared and some lore with that, but otherwise it's kind of an isolated experience and story. You occasionally go to familiar locations, but Peril on Gorgon was its own separate thing. But again, if you enjoyed the base game, I feel like this is a solid amount of new content for it. Now that $15 price tag definitely can be pretty steep, but it kind of depends on what your value is. If you really want to get the most out of it, you can take this a bit slower, really go through all of the new content and probably get a good 10 hours out of it. And I would say one of the best ways to play this is probably just adding it onto a new playthrough. Play through some of the vanilla quests, which you probably haven't played in a very long time now. And then once you actually unlock the quest to go to Gorgon, you will have a nice little pit stop. It's a bit of a change of pace, a change of tone, and I think overall a really nice addition to the Outer Worlds holistically. I really enjoyed my time with this DLC. It's definitely one of those things where the DLC doesn't do anything wrong, but at the same time, it's not changing anything in a comprehensive or huge way. It's just more content for the game, and if you want that, then this is definitely worth a download. But yeah, hopefully this video was informative or helpful for some of you. Hopefully it kind of informed your purchasing decision as to whether or not this is something you're going to get into now, or I'm sure with some, wait for a sale in the future. I'll be curious to see what they do with the second DLC, if it'll be similar in size or scope, or maybe do more on the side of weapons or other content. Either way though, as always again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.